Hello, my name's David. I'm an environment artist, and today we're in Crimson Desert. And specifically today we're going to have a look at this river, this rather nice looking river here. And for reference, let me show you where we are in the world. We are here, and pretty much still in the starting area of this ridiculously big looking map. It's just blowing my mind how big this world is. It's really exciting. So if you want to check it out yourself, it's all the way down there. Here's the main town, Hernand Castle, with its big mysterious energy. So I thought we'd start here. And we're at a rather nice time of day. The very flattering sort of morning sunshine. So be warned, this is an in-depth look at this river. We're not talking about gameplay, story, or anything else really. We're having a good old look at the water tech. So this is going to be quite focused. So you have been warned. And I'm speaking on this as an artist who works on the rivers of Red Dead Redemption 2. So I like to feel that in many ways I know what I'm talking about. I'm not a graphics programmer. I'm not even a tech artist. I'm just an environment artist. And so I approach everything from that basis. You know, what I say is what I'm inferring from what I can see and analyze, and from the scant information that Pearl Abyss have given us. And, you know, they've hinted at stuff about this water, but we've not really had much of a kind of in-depth look at all. So it's all inference and analysis here. So before we get into the nitty-gritty of the water, I want to offer my thanks to channel members as usual. Greatly appreciated. Thanks very much. There you all are on the screen there. Lovely bunch. And we have a private Discord server for channel members, which is a nice place to hang out. I'm there most weekdays, so if you're considering joining, then feel free, pop in, and we'll have a little chat. So let's get on with it, shall we? I've been dying to look at these rivers for quite a while, and indeed this was one of the first things I checked out when I started the game. I was like, let me look at some water. What's this water like? Because Pearl Abyss have been kind of making a thing of this live simulation that they're running. It's very uncommon for games to be running water simulations. Your usual method is hand-authored flow maps. And flow maps, if you don't know, are basically vector maps where a color map is used to denote two-dimensional directions. A bit like a compass, you know, north, south, east, west. And all the color blends in between those denote all the myriad directions that the water flows might go. So they're almost always pre-baked. Then if there's any water interactions, that will be down to physics and, you know, interaction with the water surface, VFX, things like that. Pearl Abyss have been telling us that this is a live simulation. So we'll get into that in a little while. But for now, let's just have a look at the river, shall we? I'll stop nattering about it. And let's just have a good old look. So, I mean, every bit of the rivers I see are just phenomenal. They're really good. And, you know, all modesty aside, I don't think any games have bettered RDR2's rivers in terms of just their visual fidelity. You know, for the limitations of the tech at the time, yeah, they're not perfect. Nothing's perfect, is it? But we put an awful lot of thought into the river construction and the water surface. And it's a combination of those two things. You know, it's the riverbed, the river edges, and the water surface that make your river. They make or break it, don't they? So looking at this is just really like hitting home in how the water is sitting in its bed. You know, I've been saying for well over a year now on my channel, you know, like nearly all game developers don't really understand water surface. In that water is always trying to get to a level state. You know, it's trying to rest at a flat level. And so many games, I could show you so many. In fact, I've done videos on this in the past. So many games in this situation would have what I call a slopey ribbon. and it would just be a relatively flat ribbon that is going down a very, relatively steep angle, a very steep angle for water surfaces in the real world. And that, it just almost never happens. The only time you get a steep slopey ribbon on a river is if the riverbed is impervious rock and sloping down at an angle, and then the water would skim over it. And yeah, that situation fine. But a normal river, your water is not a slopey ribbon ever. And Pearl Abyss understands this well, I should say maybe that the simulation understands this, of course. They've set up a simulation, and that simulation is behaving really well. It's a very accurate simulation to my mind. Because look, at every little level here, you can see that it's running over the riverbed. It's swirling around things. But it's also, if you look at it in a sort of microcosm, it's a series of little steps down. Obviously they're not regular steps like a flight of stairs, but it's step, 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 step. You can see it there. Let's go into first person, then we can get it all. And it's accurately going over obstacles under the water. You see that there. I mean, at this point, let's bust out the reshade, because reshade is really helpful here. We can just see the geometry of the water, and it's just amazing, isn't it? I mean, you can see little VFX getting spawned there, where agitation is happening. But I mean, just check that out. It's flowing, isn't it? It's flowing like a river does. I'm really impressed with this. It's really, really good. I mean, you can see the sort of density of the water. I mean, that's pretty high, isn't it? It's really, really good. Oh, our character's getting in the way there. But just check this out here. Look at it. Look at it flowing down. Is that not the best river water you've ever seen? It's the best river water I've ever seen. Yeah. And so if I, let's just come out of that and have a look at the interaction of the character. You can see that the character's ripples are interacting with the existing flows. They're coarser, the resolution's not as high, but it doesn't really have to be. It's what looks good. So let's just pop back into normal mode. It's interacting very convincingly with the rest of it. So let's just pick this up here. Let's have a good grab of this. See if I can't plop it down in the river so we can get some interaction on that. So, no, don't slam. Yeah, didn't want to slam it. So let's just place that down there. Out the way. Let's put on wireframe. And so you can see it's interacting with the log. And then this is one of the savings that they're doing. Once movement stops on any object in the water, then the sim disregards it. So you saw as it sort of initially sort of plopped in the river there, there's quite a lot going on, and then it just kind of, as soon as the object stops, then the interaction stops as well. So, let's pop it down again. There we go. So, as it's moving, you see the ripples, the interactions, and when it comes to rest, interaction stops. And, that's a concession, because you can't do everything. They're doing a lot with this water. And so you've got to make some savings somewhere. So I should say in this, I'm not really looking at the waterfalls. They're VFX. So let's just look at that. You can see the sim ends at the top of the waterfall. Starts again at the bottom. This is just VFX particles. So, and I mean, I think they're fine. Yeah, it's fine. I mean, there's a very good reason why no one's doing sim waterfalls. Because they would be amazingly difficult and expensive. It would be a very difficult thing to do. And when you can achieve, a pretty good result with VFX, then it's fine, isn't it? It's I'm fine with that. I've seen better, but I think it's perfectly serviceable. And it's the main body of water that I'm interested in, and that is really sort of using the fancy tech here. So check out the ripples there from our swimming. I mean, it's pretty agitated, perhaps slightly too much, maybe. But, you know, I mean, it's all good, isn't it? Right, up you get. So this is yet more examples of Pearl Abyss. You know, they've cleverly used this simulation, but the terrain work is really good. I think this it's absolutely stunning terrain and landscape work here. And it's showing in the riverbed and the construction of the riverbanks and stuff. And like I said before, that stepping nature of the river, you know, they understand the construction of a river, and it's not all slopey downhill. It's a series of flatter sections with cascades and flatter sections and pools, especially like here with a waterfall. Over the millennia, these waterfalls widen out areas into pools, just like this one. And you see, it's pretty flat. You know, this is a flatter section. And any river is like this, just at different scales. It's got a drop and a flat section, a drop and a flat section. And sometimes it's on the large macro scale like this, with a big old pool, and for the rest of it, you know, it's on a micro scale in the smaller construction of the river when you see it, as it tumbles over rocks and obstacles. So, you know, this is showing that they're not just using good tech to simulate believable water. You know, you've got to marry that with a believable, rational, and well observed riverbed and riverbanks. Again, it's here. Look at this waterfall, rock pool. It widens out because of all that pummeling over the millennia. It carves it out, and it just has the air of authenticity when you see it like this. And all too often you see rivers and their banks, they're almost stuck on top of the terrain in a sort of additive sense, whereas here, you know, it's very much sort of etching into the terrain like real rivers do, don't they? Real rivers cut into the terrain. Every bit of water that falls on a landscape ends up going down and down to the lowest spots, and that's why you get rivers, because all that water accumulates and it drags every bit of particulates with it, and you know, you get deposition dragging the landscape down with it over the millennia and millennia. I think they've done a really good job, really good job with this. So maybe at this point it's a good spot to sort of talk about simulations and stuff, because one of the reasons why you don't get simulations of water in games is that they're too computationally expensive, and films use them a lot, because films obviously offline rendered, aren't they? It's not interactive. Games have never been able to do that, and most of the water you see in films and a lot of games is usually done in Houdini, things like that. And Houdini has a simulation facility called Flip Sims, which is a fluid implicit particle system. So that is what you call a smoothed particle hydrodynamic system. Sounds fancy, doesn't it? So that basically means that you fill a volume full of loads of particles, usually millions, and then let them do their thing, basically. And so if you've made a rational riverbed and riverbanks, i.e. a realistic looking one, with a realistic incline, and then you run the simulation, the particles are given the right properties of water, the right viscosity, and then let gravity do its thing. And those particles will move and bounce around and interact with each other, and you'll get pressure zones, and you know, the pressure will then impact on the speed of those particles relative to each other, and that's how you arrive at a fairly realistic water simulation. And so if you were to look at a flip sim in cross section, it would look something like this here. And so if you look at that line on top of it, that's what you would generally get out of it, is like your water surface mesh. So you would basically sort of render it all down, disregarding all the volume of water to arrive at a water surface mesh. And from all those particles moving, you can extract flow maps, fog maps, agitation maps, all those things that then things like shaders and VFX can hook into those things to then generate splashes and the flow that you see in the materials, things like that. And they're really effective. They look really good. And yeah, you know, the only thing is that they're offline, as it were. They're not live as such, because then to get interaction with the water, you've got to then layer on physics in-game on top of those systems. And so where Pearl Abyss have deviated, they've gone a different route, and they're using what you call a shallow water equation solver. So an SWE solver, which is basically, you take your sort of Houdini flip sim, it's that concept, but you collapse a dimension. So you collapse the vertical. So by collapsing the vertical dimension, you save an awful lot of processing power. And, you know, whereas in a flip sim, you would need millions, in an SWE, you can go down by an order of magnitude. So you might need hundreds of thousands as opposed to millions. And Pearl Abyss have said that they're using a maximum of 250,000 particles within a radius of the player. So even lacking that internal dimension of like under the water surface, you can still extract where the particles are getting squeezed between rocks, because at the end of the day, all you want is the water surface mesh. You don't need anything like underneath. You know, all you need is just the surface mesh, and then the rest is handled by shaders and stuff. So it's a really clever way of using a particle system that is, you know, relatively live. So if I go back to ReShade, check out all the flows we've got here, right? If I press pause, ReShade ignores the UI. So there we go. You see the default state of the water right there. And when I unpause it, you'll see the sim run and develop. So let's unpause now. So watch it, and then it gets into its groove, and then it maintains a sort of homeostasis here. And it's only when an interaction occurs, like the player, or if you drop something in the flow, that then what you're doing is then melding with what's happening there. Another thing, if you look now, let me go into first person here. Now, I don't know whether this, it's probably an optimization, but look at how we've got this frosted sort of look to it, haven't we? So as soon as you move the camera, it's back live again. It does stuff. So my feeling is that this is, they're just using a coarser version of the simulation when the camera's not moving. It seems like it's tied to camera movement. And so as soon as I move the camera again, it all comes back again. Now, I mean, I would rather they just do that a further distance away from the player, because as soon as you stop, it quite quickly does that, which is, it's not that great, is it? It could be a bug, or it could be just an optimization, a kind of LOD, if you will. But yeah, you know, we don't know, do we? So all that grounding done, we can look at it with a little bit more of an informed sort of view, I think, or I hope. And so let me get back to just admiring the river in some ways. I mean, I've been saying how much I admire the terrain work going on, and I think it's really, really good, right? But we've got a very interesting little section here, because this is one of the only bits that sticks out to me as being unnatural. And what I mean by that is, if you look here, look at the river, and then look at the terrain on the right. That terrain is sloping down from the river edge, and you never see a river and get to the riverbank, and the riverbank flows downhill. You never get that unless there's some man-made interference going on, something like that, because there's no good reason for this river to turn here. I suppose this is one for the potential terrain artists out there, or maybe existing terrain artists as well, right? This is what I would look at it like. You know, you look at this river, and a river will not turn unless it's got a really good reason to turn. You know, impervious rock, obstacles, something like that, incline, you know. And here, there's no good reason for that river to turn down there. It would spill all over here. So this is probably what we're looking at here, is design overriding landscape art. And this happens all the time. you know, for whatever reason, mission design say like, oh, we want this thing here. Can you move the river, curve it around? And the artist is often, or I was, it's like, no, the river wouldn't do that. The river doesn't want to turn that way. And so you've got to have a bit of a back and forth with mission design, and arrive at a conclusion really of what would be best. And usually that boils to like, you're the artist, you figure it out. So as an artist, you've got to come up with some sort of satisfactory reason why the river's turning. And they've not really provided that here. And the best example that I can show you here is that because they've got a sim going and the water is behaving how real world water would behave to a large extent, right? The water's coming around here and it's like, okay, yeah, we're turning around here, but let me put ReShade back on. The water is going, no, I want to carry on going over here. Because can you see it here? The water is escaping the banks here. And it's flowing where it would naturally go. It's literally going through that bank. And that bit right in front of the player is like, you know, I want to go over here because I'm water and I'm going to go downhill. So, you know, that's literally an example of like, yeah, that riverbank edge, it really should have been sunk further down so that there's a believable edge to here. And I mean, you know, it's not a criticism. I'm not, you know, I'm not nitpicking. I'm just showing examples of how rivers behave and the best ways to implement a river and integrate it with its river banks, especially if you're using a sim. Because if you're using a sim on your water, it's going to show up every flaw in your terrain work. Because the sim will just make mincemeat of it. It'll splash everywhere. It'll overflow the banks where you don't want it to, because you've not made the river bank in a believable way. So, you know, that's perhaps a headache to some if you're going to be using sims, because that sim will not be kind to your poor terrain work if it's not adhering to certain basic principles of geology. So I thought that was quite an interesting little section there. But let's move on. Let's carry on up here. Again, you know, this stepping nature. This river is a masterclass, niggles aside, in how rivers should be made. It's getting all the things right that in my previous videos, I did a series of 4 videos on rivers in games actually, which you might like, but it's nailing every one of the criticisms of all those games. You know, they're getting it all right, bar a couple of little niggles, you know, but I'm not gonna, you know, pick at that, because as I said, mission design often trumps terrain design or all other considerations really. And so the river is getting much narrower here, so we're seeing a sort of more of a babbling mountain stream. The resolution is really good. It's beautiful. Look at those, the sort of ripples within the ripples, as it were. You know, you see the flow, they're really high resolution flow maps that it's generating. And you see the optimization coming in there, don't you? It's like, what are you doing? Ugh, so move the camera and it pops back into existence. But it's just remarkable. You know, see, look, steps, step, 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 all the way. Yeah, and that sim is informing agitation, of course. So wherever you're getting your fastest flow, your agitated water, you know, the shaders just hook into that, and then you'll bring in your foam map and stuff like that. Yeah. But check out here, you know, these lovely little bits here where it bunches up before boulders, splits either side, and then you have a little calm bit in the lee of the boulder. I mean, there's so much to look at. These are intensely interesting objects in the game. I mean, this is the first time I've been able to look at rivers like this and sort of just see so much that's right. It's amazing. I'm really pleased for Pearl Abyss. You know, Pearl Abyss, you've done a really outstanding job on these rivers. Well done. You should be proud of this. It's so good. And look at that there. As you get a steeper section where it's running over, you know, this bit here, the riverbed's getting shallower, and it sort of riffles over that shallower bit, hits the bottom where it's deeper, and you get a standing wave going up there. Let's pop ReShade on to see it a bit better. You know, you see all of that, those they're almost like sand dunes, aren't they? They ripple down, and then it bunches, standing wave, and then it splits over. I'm going to just get player view to get an overhead here, and look at that. Every little scene on this river is just, oh, it's like a masterclass in water flow. And you couldn't hand edit this. You could spend weeks and weeks painting flows and stuff. And it's a difficult job, and you'd never get it with this level of realism. You just can't compete with a good simulation. As an artist can do a pretty good job, but no. I mean, just look at the edges here, this drag, because you always get the strongest flow in the middle of the water, and the edges, the riverbanks, they create drag on the flow, and it's just so well illustrated there, isn't it? That drag on the right hand side here. It's just so amazingly good. But as an artist, if you're hand painting flows and stuff, inevitably you're going to get the point where you've done all this work painting flow maps and stuff, and then someone goes and plonks a boulder in, or removes a boulder, or several, or many, and your whole flow map is broken. Then it doesn't make any sense anymore because stuff's been moved, and that is guaranteed to happen. So the beauty of this sim, is that, let's just pause it. You've got your default state. You don't have to do any hand editing at all, do you really? I mean, let's unpause it and watch it run. You see it develop there, doesn't it? It's live, and then it reaches that sweet spot, and it stays there. And it doesn't need to go anywhere else, does it, really? And then, of course, textures back on, and man, look at that. Look at that. That is just so good, isn't it? Carry on going up here. I mean, I could talk about this river all day, but I'd better not, had I? I think you've only so much appetite to watch me infuse over these rivers. But, each little section here is just absolutely amazing. I mean, look at this section here. This is a really interesting, lovely bit of environment here, isn't it? You get it here, you've got a slower flow because the flow is getting channeled around these rocks here and funneled down here. That is such a natural looking bit. And here you can see the flow just peters out as it shallows off because the main flow, it's taking it all down here. Check that out. See, again, let's just do the pause trick. I love doing this. So again, there you go. You've got your default. Your particles are at the default state. Let's unpause. And it develops into that wonderful simulation there. I wish we could see that without the map getting in the way, because we don't get a chance. You sort of see the tail end of that default state, but you don't really get an appreciation where ReShade is really doing a good job here. I think that I'm loving that. Yeah, that's very telling, isn't it, of the nature of this simulation. So, at the risk of going on and on, I better leave it there. Suffice to say, I think this is hands down the best water I've seen in any game. I think it's absolutely fantastic. Well done, Pearl Abyss. Okay, so thanks for watching. I've really enjoyed looking at this river, and I will just still have endless pleasure exploring this really amazing world and just checking out all the different rivers. I will get to the ocean at some point. There's no mad rush, but I want to certainly check out the coastal waters. That's using a different system as I understand it. I think they're using an FFT hybrid thing. So that'll be interesting to see that. So thanks for watching. Take it easy. Goodbye.